We know that there are many methods in Word to make text look good, other than just plain old paragraphs. We've talked a little bit about lists. We know that we can use tabs to easily create data on a page that's laid out in a way that resembles columns. Both of those are quick and easy, assuming that data is fairly simple, especially tabs. If it only consumes one line for each entry and the data contains text, it's pretty easy to do. But if any of those are multi-lined entries or other types of content, things just get more complicated. What I'm referring to primarily is that when some of our columns that we try to do using tabs don't contain the same amount of content, therefore it makes vertical alignment very challenging, if not impossible. When that happens, a table may be a better choice. Working with alignment and formatting is much easier in a table, and here's a huge hint. If we actually turn off the borders, it looks like tabs or even full newspaper-style columns done with some type of other page layout application, not a word processor. We'll get to that though. So remember, tab text is great, but in some circumstances, tables will be a better choice because they simply give us more control. If we really take the blinders off and expand our view of the possibilities, we also realize that instead of having a table be a small part of a page, we can instead size it to cover an entire page, and then it can be easily used for page layout, not just tabular text. So again, we have lots of possibilities, but the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out how do we make tables to begin with. Well, Word provides numerous ways to create tables. I can actually think of maybe 6 off the top of my head. What we want to do is take a quick look at how to do some of the fast and easy ones first. Then we'll take a look at how to work with existing text or content in a couple of subsequent lessons. In order to do this, I'm actually going to have us create a brand new document. Then we'll come back to this document in the next lessons. Let's go ahead and press Control N, N is for new, and that does bring up a brand new document. Now we're just going to play here for a little bit, so it doesn't really matter what we do, but just follow along with the steps. If we want to insert a table, we're going to go to the Insert tab. And we have an entire table option underneath the Tables group, so I love it when things make sense, and this one's fairly straightforward. However, once you click the drop down for the table option, then you see that you get all kinds of options, and we simply need to run through what some of these are. The one at the very top doesn't look very interesting, and it can be confusing, but what you're supposed to do is actually drag in order to designate the width and height, in other words, the number of rows and number of columns that you want in your table. And because of our wonderful live preview, you can see that even though I'm not holding any buttons on my mouse, I'm just moving it, it's actually showing me what that table is going to look like on my document. What we can do is simply figure out what size we want. In this case, maybe we'll do 3 columns by 2 rows. Once we get our mouse where we need it to be, simply click. Then we can see over on our document that we have this particular table created. Now we're not using this Find panel or the Navigation panel for this particular part, so let's go ahead and close that out, and that will allow us to see the entire width of the document. You will also notice that once we have a table inserted and our cursor is somewhere in there, then we actually get a contextual tab. Tables provide both a design and a layout contextual tab, and of course we're going to talk about those in depth in some of our later lessons. For now, let's go ahead and click below our first table. We'll just press Enter to make sure we have some extra space, and let's look at a couple of the other ways that we can insert tables. Back to the Insert tab, drop down for Table. The next one that we see is an option that actually says Insert Table, and it has the wonderful ellipsis after it. Anytime we see that, we know that when we click, we're going to be given other options. We'll give it a click, and here we can see the options, very similar to what we had by just dragging, to designate the number of columns and the number of rows that we want. You can either type in here, or you can use the spinner buttons to designate the configuration that you want. This time let's do a 4 column by 3 row. The difference with this option is we also get to choose what our fit behavior is. In other words, do we want each of the columns, in this case our 4 columns, to be automatically sized, or do we want to designate a specific size? Alternately, we can say auto-fit the width of the columns based on what type of content I put into those columns. And thirdly, we can have it auto-fit to the window. Let's go ahead and choose Fixed Column Width, just so you can see what that looks like. And using the spinner buttons, I designated 1.5 inches. You also can choose the box at the bottom to have this become the default, so when you create new tables, you don't even have to go through those few settings again. We'll click OK, and here you can see that this table is not as wide as the first one. When we use the first option of just dragging over the grid, it creates a table that is the width of the page. This time we designated 1.5-inch columns, and that's exactly what we have. Let's keep going. Let's click below the table, press enter, and I think you have this part figured out already. Back to the Insert tab, back to the Table drop down. And this time we want to talk about drawing a table. Go ahead and give that a click. And what I'll tell you is that this one gets to be a little confusing for people. If we are creating very consistent tables, like we did the first 2 times, we know we have a certain number of rows and a certain number of columns. The options are going to be faster and easier. But if we have kind of a unique configuration where it's not really symmetrical like these are, then drawing becomes a better way. I'm just going to use the scroll wheel on my mouse to go ahead and move up a little bit so you can see. And you notice that our cursor turns into a pencil. We need to physically draw the table. And in order to do so, we start by drawing the outside border of the table. So let's go ahead, press and hold our left mouse button, and drag down and to the right. And we can make it whatever size we want. When we let go, this becomes the outside of our table. Now, using our pencil and either dragging from left to right or top to bottom, we can create our own rows and columns. So let's say we want to have a title across the top. Let's go ahead and drag a row all the way over. Notice that it kind of pops over there. Not a whole lot that you can do with it, and it also makes it horizontal. So it's not like using a drawing tool per se. It knows that we're trying to draw rows and columns, so it's a little bit more limited, or it pops to certain locations. We let it go, and now we have one big cell going across the top of our table. If we then wanted to subdivide it, we could simply continue to drag wherever we want rows and columns to be designated. Now, as I said, I'm not sure about you, but this doesn't look anything like what we created up above. This is a very unique configuration. And while we certainly could do that by using the other tools, and then using tools called merging or splitting cells, which we'll get to in a later lesson, this was a little bit faster. The key here is that when you want to stop working with drawing the table, you need to turn off the little pen, because we can't click and type at this point. Notice that when we enter this mode, we again go into our table tools, and we have our design and our layout. On the right-hand side, there's an option under Draw Borders that has a Draw Table option. If we turn that off, that's what gets our cursor back to the regular I-beam pointer that we're looking for. So that one's creative. It can be nice. Don't use it that often, but when you need to do something that's really not symmetrical, it really is a fabulous and quick tool. Let's go ahead and do just one more in this initial lesson. Let's go ahead and press Control-End to get to the end of our document. Press Enter one more time, and let's take another trip up to the Insert tab and the Table drop-down. We've been through dragging on the grid, Insert Table, and Draw Table. We'll talk about the next 2 options in the following lessons. We want to go ahead this time and talk about Quick Tables, which is one of Word's newer features. These actually contain some different items that are created using tables, but they're also already populated. And what we can see, for example, is that we like calendars. If you've ever tried to create a calendar by hand using tables, you will know that it can be a really time-consuming and laborious process. So instead, we're simply going to click, and I'm not going to be too worried about which one. I'll go ahead and click on Calendar 2. This inserts our calendar. We probably need to scroll down so that we can see it. And again, we can see that this is just text. We will be able to select any of this to manipulate the text, maybe even add in some other information. But we did not have to create this table and then populate it ourselves. So that's kind of fun. Depending on what type of work you do in Word, you may or may not ever use it, but it's good to know that it's there. That gives us kind of an overview of 4 different methods that we can use to create tables. And these are all really good, especially if you want to create the table first and then add the content. The quick tables, of course, give us kind of the best of both worlds, where they do a lot of the work for us, then we can just go in and customize it. What we'll do in the next couple of lessons is take a look at the last 2 ways to create tables, primarily converting text that we already have to a table and working with Excel spreadsheets. Since we're not going to be coming back here, we can go ahead and close this document, and we do not need to save the changes.